Welcome to this CHCG video capsule and podcast episode. I'm Anna Christofides, funder and managing director for the CHCG and president of Impact Medicom, which provides project management, editorial support, and coordination of consensus activities. The Canadian Hematology Consensus Group, or CHCG, is a national collaboration of Canadian hematologists and healthcare professionals dedicated to improving patient care through the development of national consensus recommendations in hematologic malignancies. Our most recent consensus paper has just been published in Current Oncology. The paper provides treatment recommendations for hematologists managing patients with relapsed and/or refractory follicular lymphoma. Today, we will discuss the content of the paper with Dr. Lemieux, who is a lead author and a member of the CHCG Scientific Committee. Dr. Lemieux is a hematologist at the CHU de Québec-Université Laval in Quebec City, Quebec, and a Canadian expert in the treatment of follicular lymphoma. Welcome, Dr. Lemieux. To start, what was the purpose of developing the Canadian consensus recommendations for the treatment of relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma?
Thank you, Hannah, for having me today. As you know, follicular lymphoma space has been pretty quiet in the last decade, but in the last few years, there's actually new options that have been studied in large phase 3 trial, making treatment sequencing more complex. Also, another good reason to develop those kind of recommendation is the fact that access to treatment varies significantly from one province to another. So a patient options can actually depend on where they live. We felt there was a real need for national recommendation that give community physicians practical Canadian-specific guidance, help provincial program think about equity of access, and ultimately reduce the variability in practice from center to center and province to province.
That's great. And so in terms of developing these recommendations, what methodology did the panel use?
So we used the modified Delphi process. So basically, we ask different Canadian hematologists with expertise in follicular lymphoma to go through a series of structured survey where we proposed a recommendation. We asked them to rate the level of agreement they have with the different recommendation. And then we revised and recirculate some statement based on the group's feedback. We define consensus as at least 80% of agreement among the panel. At the end of those rounds, we actually didn't stop there. We also asked community practice hematologists to go through those recommendations to make sure we have an agreement also for the community practice physician to make sure that those recommendations will actually be used. So the paper is actually based on Canadian hematologists, expert in follicular lymphoma, but also was also reviewed by community practice physicians. So we think because of this paper would be very useful for everybody across Canada.
That's great. Thank you so much. And which specific clinical questions did the consensus paper address?
So the paper is structured to address the most relevant question in hematologists would have following those patients. So we cover, of course, the indication of treatment, but we also cover the need for PET-CT and also rebiopsy. We also discussed the preferred option for second-line therapy, but we divided second-line in early relapse and into later relapse patient. And finally, we cover third and later line options.
And so based on the modified Delphi process, take us through each of the recommendations that were developed to address each of these clinical questions.
So there's 6 clinical questions, so we'll go through all of those. The first one is, when is therapy indicated for relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma? So in that section, we cover the fact that a symptomatic patient with relapsed follicular lymphoma should be managed with active surveillance unless they fail the GELF treatment criteria. We also state that patient with symptomatic follicular lymphoma should be treated as soon as they have symptoms or if they meet the GELF criteria. The second clinical question is, when should PET-CT be considered? And this one has only one statement, is a PET scan should be considered in patient with concern for histologic transformation, mainly because we know PET-CT is not easily accessible everywhere. So we wanted to make sure that in that setting, patients should have a PET-CT. The third question is when should rebiopsy be performed? So rebiopsy should be considered if feasible in all patients with relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma to confirm relapse, but mainly to exclude histologic transformation. The three next questions are mainly on treatment. So the fourth clinical question is what is the optimal second-line therapy for follicular lymphoma who relapse within 2 years of immunotherapy plus or minus R maintenance? So mainly what we call the POD24, so progression of disease in the next 24 months following initiation of therapy. In that setting, we really emphasize the fact that those patients should be rebiopsy to exclude histologic transformation and to make sure we really treat follicular lymphoma and not large B-cell lymphoma. The second point is the fact that most of those patients should be treated with what we call the lenalidomide rituximab triplets, because we now have data with epcoritamab, but also tafasitamab, increasing the likelihood of response and the long-term response in those patients. So those are the Len-R triplets that we recommend for most of those patients. If there's different reason for the patient not being eligible to receive those therapy, we highlight the fact that if immunotherapy is used, obinutuzumab should be the preferred monoclonal antibody. And finally, there might still some role of autologous stem cell transplantation to be considered for younger fit patient with POD24 relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma. The next clinical question is for later relapse. So what is the optimal second-line therapy for follicular lymphoma who relapse more than 2 years following initiation of chemoimmunotherapy plus or minus R maintenance? So for those patients, we actually have many options. Of course, we're still proposing to use Len-R triplets, so Len-R with epcoritamab or tafasitamab in most settings. But chemoimmunotherapy retreatment, which an alternate chemotherapy, could be an option for those patients, especially for those who had a very lengthy remission of many years. So those patients can be re-exposed to chemoimmunotherapy. Finally, but also the fact that rituximab maintenance can be considered after repeat chemoimmunotherapy in patients who did not receive R maintenance after first-line therapy. And for those patients, we really we're not sure how to use autologous stem cell transplant. So mainly, we're stating that it's uncertain if in the era of targeted therapy that this approach should be used. And finally, the last clinical question is what is the optimal therapeutic approach for patients with relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma after 2 and more prior lines of therapy? So basically, third line and plus. In that setting, CAR-T is the main option for a patient who are actually eligible, because we know CAR-T can have actually higher toxicity than other treatment. But also for other patients, we do consider Len-R triplets again if they haven't been exposed to Len-R in the past. We also now have access to bispecific antibody monotherapy, so this could be an option for third line and later line of therapy. And finally, for patients with many who actually receive many different treatment options, we can consider zanubrutinib and obinutuzumab for those patients.
That's great. And how overall, putting all of this together, do you see these types of papers being used?
I think it could be used in many ways. The first and foremost, it's actually, it needs to be a practical guide. So we really hope that a community hematologist could use this paper to decide, what he will do with the patient in front of him. The second good way to see it is actually, as we stated earlier, it could be used as an advocacy tool. So since we are actually presenting a national consensus, it's easier to make the case to funders and provincial programs for more consistent access to treatment across the country. And finally, it could be used as an educational tool for trainees and really for anyone who wants to know more about a Canadian-specific summary of where the evidence and the expert opinion is currently stand for relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma.
That's great. And how do you see these points translating into an impact in clinical practice?
So my hope is that it will actually improve consistency of care across the country, so that even a patient, that lives in smaller center has access to the same treatment that he could receive in larger academic center. We really hope that it will also, support community hematologists and gives everyone, a common reference point for equitable access discussion with funders. And finally, we really think it could help a clinician to think about how to integrate those newer therapies that we were referring earlier on as they become available in the future, and ultimately supports better, more evidence-based sequencing decisions.
Great. And so what other topics is the CHCG working on?
The group is quite active. There's actually a first-line DLBCL paper that was just submitted to a journal. So that's the next one to watch for in the future.
Great. And how is this initiative meaningful to you personally as a clinician and a researcher?
So what I find genuinely rewarding is the process itself. As expert practicing in different provinces, we each bring our own subtleties. There's small differences in how we approach a given situation, mainly by our local experience. So being able to sit down together, discuss those differences openly, and actually reach agreement on a Canadian wide approach is a meaningful thing to be part of. And beyond the discussions, there's the bigger picture, knowing this paper could help move us toward more equitable care across the country, so that a patient's treatment doesn't depend on which province they actually live in. That's a big part of what makes the initiative meaningful for me.
That's great. That's great. And so where can listeners go if they want to get more information on the CHCG?
Everything is available on the website, so www.canadianconsensusgroup.com. So very easy website to remember.
Great, great. So thank you so much, Dr. Lemieux, for outlining this important initiative. And I would also like to thank our funders, Roche, B1 Medicines, and Insight for funding the papers, which we wouldn't be able to do otherwise, and also for Merck for funding the video capsule. Thank you so much, Dr. Lemieux, for your time on this. That was great.
Thank you, Hannah.